Ohio gun laws, what are our options? Heights Libraries is very pleased to partner with the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland on this and other public forums as a way to foster and support intellectual freedom and open discussion of important issues like this that face our community. We are dedicated to offering equal access to information and resources to all of our citizens, so please feel free to take a brochure or a program guide on your way out tonight. And I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's moderator, Darrielle Snipes. Darrielle is a seasoned award-winning journalist who now calls Cleveland her home. She has reported in various cities across the country, including Detroit, Baltimore, and Oklahoma City. When she first came to Cleveland, she worked at WKYC-TV, and her last stop was in Richmond, Virginia as a morning anchor for the ABC affiliate WRIC-TV. She has spent most of her career as a journalist in front of the camera and as an anchor and reporter, and is now working at our very own Ideastream doing both radio and TV. So please give a warm welcome to Darrielle Snipes.
Thank you, and good evening, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland Forum on Ohio gun laws. What are our options? The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees for Americans the right to keep and bear arms. Congress creates laws regulating that right. The debate over gun rights and gun control rages on. It actually goes all the way back to the wording of that amendment and whether it applies only to a well-regulated militia. But beyond the interpretation and application of the amendment, these disagreements in this country abound over balance the constitutional right with calls for stricter regulation, sadly reigniting with every mass shooting that dominates the headlines and 24/7 cable news coverage. The USA Today reported recently that Americans make up 4.4% of the worldwide population, but own 42% of the world's civilian firearms. For one side, guns represent aggression, violence, and somewhat paranoid perspective that you have to protect yourself from external threats. For the other side, guns represent safety, security, and self-sufficient, and wrapped up in some of that is often a form of traditional masculinity, whereby a man of the house must be able to physically protect his family. But look at how guns are being used. 49 dead in an Orlando nightclub 2 years ago. 58 dead last October when a gunman targeted patrons at an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas. The Parkland, Florida school shooting that killed 17 in February, one of 3 major school shootings in 2018 thus far. And then late last month, 5 journalists killed inside a newsroom in Maryland. So the question is, how do we stop the shootings? Is stricter gun control the answer? Stringent universal background checks, waiting periods for gun purchases, a higher age limit, and what about bans on certain weapons, such as semi-automatic rifles, commonly referred to as assault rifles? Is the country's gun culture contributing to this problem? And what do we do as Ohioans and U.S. citizens to get our voices heard by the politicians that we vote into office? Polls in Ohio and nationwide show majorities in favor of furthering gun control, particularly better background checks and ban on assault rifles. Here to discuss all of this is our panel. Laura Lewis with Moms Demand Action, Steve Ritchey, a board member with the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence, David Eggert with Ohioans for Gun Safety, and Rosetta Craig, Rosie, with the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. Please welcome the panelists. And so I wanted to start this evening, before we get into all of the topics, is to go and have each of our panelists kind of go through why they got involved, what was it in their lives or their family members' lives that spawned you to want to get involved, to have a voice, and talk a little bit about the organization that you chose and what they do. Rosie, please start.
Hello. My name is Rosie Craig. I got involved in gun violence prevention because of a tragedy. My daughter, who was 15 at the time, had another friend who was 15 at the time, and her name was Penny Chang. Those of you who have lived here for 20-some years will remember that it was a beautiful, beautiful March day, one of the first nice days that we had. She was gunned down by a deranged, jilted boyfriend who had been a friend of her brother's, a much older guy, a guy that she tried to get rid of, and when she jilted him, he took aggressive action towards the family, had a court record, and eventually, on that day in March, shot her 4 times in front of her friends, and 50 yards from the police chief's office, and 25 yards from 2 policemen having breakfast. He was immediately apprehended. He bought his guns at a gun show without a background check. That's what got me started. I looked around for gun violence prevention organizations, and I first found the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence, which we have Steve Ritchey here with us tonight. I soon after that, in 2003, was offered the position, the job, of being the gun control lobbyist for the League of Women Voters of Ohio. No, I'm not paid. No, I'm not getting rich off of this. The League of Women Voters is a tiered organization, and at the national level, the League of Women Voters in the 1990s voted their position by delegate body to support better gun laws. And the position basically said that we, the League of Women Voters of the United States, believe that the proliferation of guns, of semi-automatic weapons, is a threat to public health and safety, and we believe in the ban of assault weapons, the ability to have consumer product protection applied to guns, and on from there. So what that means in the state of Ohio is the state of Ohio has, at the tier level of the League of Women Voters of Ohio, we have an office in Columbus, and we take a position on various gun laws that come before the Ohio General Assembly. So that is how I got involved, and since 2003, when the League of Women Voters takes a position on a particular gun bill in Ohio, I study the bill, I make recommendations, I'm the one who writes testimony for the legislature, I have it reviewed by my approval chain, and then I go to the State House as many times as I can, and I present that testimony. And one of the things that surprises me to realize is that many people don't realize that any citizen can go to the Ohio State House and testify for or against a bill. And so one of the things that I would like to come up for you to have a takeaway here is to understand that, yes, you can go down and put in your 2 bits. It might have to be more effective than carrying a sign around Public Square, because if we have enough people testifying for good bills and against bad bills, they might have to be late for lunch. And that's probably a good way to get their attention.
Thank you, Darrielle, and thank you all for coming tonight. My name is David Eggert. I'm here representing an organization called Ohioans for Gun Safety. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. These folks are all my friends, and I want to start by thanking them for the very valuable work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis here in Ohio to try to reduce the terrible toll of gun violence. Darrielle listed a number of the most outrageous mass shootings that we've seen in America in the last few years. You know, all these places that don't want to be remembered for massacres, places like Parkland and Las Vegas and Orlando and Sandy Hook, Connecticut. The real issue, though, with gun violence is the day-to-day toll. In America, over 100 people, over 100 now, are dying, about 106 every day from gun violence. And it's folks like these at this table tonight who are working to try to reduce that toll. The question of how I got involved in gun violence efforts as an activist and volunteer really began with my retirement. I used to be a public school teacher, and then I worked for the teachers union, and that for many years. My connection was always with schools, and I retired shortly before the Sandy Hook shootings in Newtown, Connecticut, and that's what really hit me. Although at the time, my wife was at the time, she hadn't retired yet, she was still a pastor leading a church here in Cleveland Heights. And we were wrestling with the shootings at Chardon because we had church members who were directly affected by that, who had kids in school that day. So that had already happened. That had us already talking in our church about gun violence and what can we do. We ended up as leaders of that discussion in the church, starting an organization that's still active here in the corner of Ohio here called God Before Guns. And we began to ask the question, what can people of faith do to start leading this conversation on gun violence? Well, that got us in a position where we began to get to know people like Laura and Steve and Rosie and many others around the state. We found that there were other activists out there like us who were as determined as we are to work on this terrible problem. And one of the questions that comes up so often for those of us working as activists on gun violence prevention is why don't you work together more? Why are there these different organizations? And everybody knows what the NRA is, but why are your efforts so divided? Or at least they appear sometimes to be. And as we got to know the other leaders from around the state of Ohio, we began to have conversations with them. One of the things we learned was that these organizations all fill an important niche. There are so many different aspects to fighting gun violence that we need a lot of different approaches. Legislation is only one of them. Legislation is a key element, but it's only one of the things that needs to be worked on. And we need people working on all sorts of other problems that contribute to the violence that leads to gun violence. But we began to have conversations with these leaders around the state, and we began to talk about how can we actually work together. And that's where this organization I'm representing tonight came from. It's called Ohioans for Gun Safety again. And we began to say, well, if we were going to work on something, what would it be? And we picked one issue to work on, and that issue is background checks, what we call common sense background checks. The idea, of course, is, as you probably all know, that while background checks are required on the vast majority of gun sales in America, they aren't required on every gun sale. They aren't required on every transfer of a gun. There's a huge, it's known as the loophole. There's a huge loophole in the system that allows people to sell guns to each other privately with no requirement of a background check. And so that makes it quite possible, in fact, it can make it very easy for a person who's legally prohibited by federal law from owning a firearm. It makes it easy for them to find somebody who will sell them the firearm. And as long as the seller doesn't know that this person can't legally own a gun, the seller isn't doing anything wrong. So to get to the end of the question, that's what we began to work on. A number of activists from organizations like League of Women Voters and the Brady Campaign and others around the state, the National Council for Jewish Women. We began to talk to each other, and we began to say, let's start a campaign, let's start an effort. And that's where Ohioans for Gun Safety was born. I will want to talk more about that, but let me pass the mic on and we'll come back.
Yes, we're here till 8:30, maybe a little bit longer if the library lets us, so.
Hi everybody, I'm Laura, and if you can't tell, I'm with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I became interested in gun violence prevention back when the Columbine shooting happened. My son was just a baby, and I remember watching the news coverage of that shooting and just, you know, holding my baby and just crying. And there's just one clip that has always stayed with me, and that was of a mom being interviewed. She's holding on to her son. I have a son. She's holding on to her boy. She's like, and the reporter asked her, "What are you going to make what are you going to make him for dinner?" Which was kind of like, a silly question when you think about it. And the mom, the look on her face and the way she was holding her boy, and she's like, "I'm going to make him whatever he wants." And it was that you could see the panic, you could, feel the raw emotion, the relief that he made it out. And then when Sandy Hook happened, it was just, it's heartbreaking, and I can feel the feelings of those parents and the ones that never made it home. And it was after Sandy Hook that our founder, Shannon Watts, created a Facebook page in her kitchen by herself to find other people that were similarly affected. And in 5 years, this movement has over 5 million supporters and chapters in all 50 states. This is a national organization, and I have been involved with moms here in Ohio for 4 years. I am not an activist. I was not an activist before I got involved. This issue, I come to this issue really from a place of love and from not wanting to see that heartache in anyone ever again.
I think I'm going to stand up since I've seen some people in the back kind of craning their necks around. I'm Steve Ritchey from the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence. I'm on the board. I first became interested and activated in the gun violence prevention issue almost 10 years ago. And at that time, there was really only one organization. It was Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence. It was a statewide organization that was kind of headquartered in Toledo and really founded by Toby Hoover, who was a gun violence victim. She lost her first husband to gun violence. If you get an opportunity to meet someone or you know someone who is a gun violence victim or is related to one, this is really powerful, because when you hear them speak and you realize the pain that they've gone through, you don't want that to happen to anyone. And so that's why I immediately became interested in that organization. I also was interested because we take a little bit more diverse approach sometimes. We have a program called Picture Peace, which we haven't done too much lately, mostly for budget reasons, but where we encourage high school students and middle school students to do art to express their fears and concerns about gun violence. And having a nephew who just graduated from Euclid High School, I would hate to ask him how many times the school's gone down through lockdowns. So this is something that our kids deal with, and of course it's why right now we have a resurgence because of what happened in Florida. It's really good to see that. Something else that we do is we have a committee that takes a look at legislation, and we're here tonight to learn about gun bills that are in the House of Representatives and in the Senate here in Ohio. And we put together a little information sheet that's two-sided. And if you don't have one of these, pick one up on your way out. You'll be kind of stunned to see there's like 15 or 20 bills on the front side, which is to reduce gun violence, which we're for gun violence prevention. And then on the back, there's as many that we are an opponent to. So there's quite a few, and how do you sift through all of this? That'll probably come up as a question at some point, which we can field a little bit. But one thing else I did want to mention is because we have this long-term background, we have seen the trends, and the trends are not good. A lot of times people and a lot of proponents of guns like to indicate that guns are making us safer. Well, in Ohio, it's not true, because 10, 15 years ago, the death rate in Ohio from gun violence was under 1,000, and now it's pushing 1,700. And so, and if you look at the legislation, there's been a continual weakening process, as well, of course, making concealed carry and other not good things a possibility and a reality in Ohio. So.
All right, thank you for sharing your stories. So we'll get to the questions. I know I have some questions that you have written down on a piece of paper, but if something comes up throughout the conversation, please write it down. They'll bring it to me and so that we can ask the question to the panelists. So my first question really, after you guys sharing your stories, is, this is such a polarizing issue. And it doesn't really have to be, but obviously it is. A lot of people, want to say that stricter laws and better training and education to reduce gun violence, but some view that as you want to take away their guns, and that's not necessarily the case. You just want to make, a lot of people just want the Second Amendment to be safer, but why do you think some people, the other side, jump to so many conclusions that, you're trying to get rid of the Second Amendment or you're trying to take guns away from people, when all really a lot of people are trying to do, such as yourselves, is make it safer so that we have less deaths?
First of all, I'd like to point out something that's rather surprising. As a country, we are actually coming closer together over what needs to be done on guns. After the Parkland shooting, over 90%, I think it was like 94%, and that's up. 94% of Americans, including gun owners, think that we should have universal background checks. In the other categories, more and more people are saying we need to ban assault weapons. We need to ban the clip sights. We need to ban bump stocks, which is a fairly recent development, which is actually development with tax breaks from the state of North Carolina. Now, bump stock allows you to shoot at a rate of 10 rounds per second. And if I say one chimpanzee, that's 4 rounds per second. I cannot speak 5 rounds per second. But what has happened is that commercial and political interests continue to fuel the flames of discourse and stop us from moving forward. It has to do with money.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
When it comes, and Rosie's certainly correct, that in many ways Americans are less divided than we would be led to believe. My organization has one issue only, and that is to pass in Ohio a background check law that closes the background check loophole. And when it comes to that one issue, which consistently ranks highest among all the legislative things that you might try to get passed in America, background checks is always number one. That's the one that people support consistently at the highest level, including gun owners, including NRA members. We see consistently 75 to 80% of NRA members saying, yes, we should close the background check loophole. And my point is that gun owners get it. Most people who are buying guns in America today are buying them not because they want to target shoot or hunt. They're buying them because they're afraid of some person with a gun who shouldn't have a gun,
Fear factor.
who's going to try to attack them. And they want to be prepared. It's that fear of people with guns who have no business with guns. That's why gun owners in many ways are sometimes our strongest allies, because even though they may have made that decision to buy a gun, they didn't do it because they want to shoot something. They did it because they believe there are too many people out there who have guns who shouldn't have guns. And they want to see that problem brought under control. So I think there are certainly areas of commonality, and that's a strong one.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to piggyback on you, Dave, because I absolutely agree with that. I think that this issue is too divisive, and it's a lack of connection. People hear you or they hear your group and they think, all right, they want to take away our guns. What we need to be able to do is be comfortable talking to each other and explaining, Moms Demand Action is not anti-gun. We're not against the Second Amendment. We think gun owners have a very important voice in this movement. As military members, urban and people in rural communities, we all need to be willing to talk to each other and actually hear each other and come together to work at preventing the gun violence in this country.
I'll just mention real quickly that the fear factor also works from the standpoint of the NRA feeds the gun owners with the fear that we, our organizations, pushing the legislation will take their guns away. That there's going to be universal background checks, and so all the guns are going to get logged, and then we're going to go get the guns. And it's just not going to happen. There's too many guns out there, and people have a right to have a gun. And so it's the fear, I think, naturally builds up from other public health problems like smoking. And so I think it's understandable how they can think this, but in fact, it's not really founded in reality.
Great. Well, we are getting a lot of questions from you guys, so.
Yeah, we don't really do all four of us.
No, I'm not saying you guys don't talk. I'm saying I'll just skip my questions, get to yours. That's all. I mean, I have other questions, and we'll get to the legislation just, shortly. But one of the questions from the audience is several shootings recently done by people who bought guns legally. How do we protect students in schools, and what do we do when people buy guns legally? Laura,
What I'd like to see for people who have guns legally is to have some type of red flag laws in the state. And a red flag law would empower family and law enforcement to have petition for essentially the temporary removal of a gun if they deem somebody to be a danger to themselves or others. And they go through due process. It's not coming and grabbing their guns and not giving them back. There is a due process portion of that, and if they're deemed, okay, they'll get the guns back. If not, they can temporarily hold the guns for a while. And I think that is one step of having protections for legal gun owners and to avoid tragedy.
I understand. Does anyone else want to chime in? I want you guys to talk if you guys want to talk. So.
Yeah, well, I'll be real quick with it.
No,
One thing, which, there's a whole list of things that Ohio does not have that you'll find on the back of our card. But one of them is child access to weapons. So in our state, it happened in Chardon, a grandfather gave a grandson access to the guns. He took them to the school and shot kids. And if that was another state, and I'm just going to pick a very Republican state, Utah. In Utah, they protect children. If that happens in Utah, that grandfather can be charged with a felony, but not in Ohio. So sensible gun laws really do work, and that's something we need more of here.
You have to be careful with the use of the word legal. It is legal to buy a secondhand gun without a background check. And that means that anybody who wants to go into a flea market style business can slide in through the laws and sell quote unquote his guns out of his personal collection. People can legally buy guns from that person without a background check. And we're not quite sure exactly how many guns, maybe somewhere between 20, estimates go from 20 to 40% of all guns are legally bought in this country without a background check, which is why we want to close the background check loophole. The other problem is something that John Kasich has addressed, and that is that the data in the NICS database, NICS stands for National Instant Criminal Background Check System. If you are a licensed gun dealer, and we should have all guns sold either by a licensed gun dealer or have a background check done through a licensed gun dealer. We need to have the database that is used for saying, okay, somebody wants to purchase a gun. They show the driver's license. The information is run over the telephone through the FBI database, and typically a response comes back within 45 seconds, okay? The problem is, though, that your database is only as good as the data in it. And so there are probably about 10 items that would disqualify you from being allowed to buy a weapon. One of them is domestic violence, a restraining order or domestic violence conviction. And what happened in the Sutherland Springs shooting was that he bought his guns legally, but the information that the Air Force should have submitted to the NICS database wasn't. One of the things that John Kasich has done is he has put an executive order to try to get the counties who are supposed to get all of this data into the database within a week. They often just don't, and so he's trying to get that worked on. But the problem is that the database is only as good as the data in it. So yes, a lot of people can buy guns legally who should not be able to buy guns legally, both because of the loophole and because the NICS database needs to have better data in it.
Great. And another audience question is, and I do believe this says 94% want universal background checks. What money or other influence stops lawmakers from putting universal background checks into law?
Have you been watching the news lately?
Well,
Yeah, it sounds like most
The Russians!
I'll talk about universal background checks for a minute. It is true that the gun lobby has rather steadfastly resisted what we call universal background checks, that being a term that encompasses the idea that there shouldn't be any loopholes. Every gun sold should require a background check. The current law that we have has some holes in it because of the resistance that the law faced back in, what was it, 94 when it was passed, the Brady Bill as it was originally known. The reason why it has some weaknesses, including problems with reporting the data that could prevent a sale, and also problems with not covering all the sales, and some other issues. Those problems are there because of resistance from the gun lobby. Now, does the gun lobby put money behind that resistance? I think the answer is obvious, that they do, and that they have a very successful record of supporting candidates who support their positions on issues, and a very successful record of opposition to candidates who they see as their enemies. However, I think one of the bright spots we're all seeing is that in the last couple of years, I think we saw it in 2016, we're seeing it again in 2018, maybe even more so, is that we are seeing more and more candidates who are proud to resist money from the gun lobby. There are candidates who are proud to hold up an announcement from the NRA that gives them an F. And that's a heartening development in the American political scene, that we are seeing candidates now who have the courage to say, I don't want the NRA support, I don't want any gun lobby support, I'm opposing the things that they stand for. But I would repeat again that the lobbyists, the organizations that so steadfastly resist those laws that could have been passed after Sandy Hook and many occasions since, those people are opposing the vast majority of Americans. So I think the big challenge for all of us is to make sure that we become voters who are more focused on this issue. I think the biggest challenge we have from the NRA is not so much their money, and they have a lot of it. And some have been in the news for the last couple of days in some very interesting ways, but they have a lot of money. They spent a record amount of money in 2016. But I think the great challenge for us is that so many of their members put gun violence at the top of their list of priorities. So they're considered single-issue voters. And while it's reasonable for us to consider a wide range of issues when we go to the voting booth, I think all of us have to begin to put the gun violence at the top of our list of issues too when we're choosing our candidates.
And David, I wanted to stick with you real fast to talk about what your organization is doing to try to get an issue on the ballot for 2019. You guys are working on expanding background checks because, and you're still working out the language, but then you'll shortly be able to go out and get people to sign a petition so it can be on the ballot for 2019. Can you just talk a little about why your organization is taking that route? Is it that you've lost faith in politicians to do the right thing when it comes to bills, or the bills start out great and then they weaken and they're pointless? Can you just talk about that?
Well, my colleagues and I do presentations on this topic, and we'd much rather have 20 minutes to talk about it than than 5. But let me give you a real quick synopsis. First of all, gun violence is getting worse. The CDC numbers show dramatic increases in the last couple of years that they have posted. In the US, they've gone up about 15%, and it's not suicides, it's suicides and homicides. Gun violence is getting worse, and as Steve said, we've been told by the gun lobby for years that more guns would make us safer. It's not happening. And in Ohio, we're getting even worse faster. Our rate of increase, as compared to about 15% nationally, our rate of increase over that same period in Ohio was 25%. And we are now in Ohio, we're seeing people die from gun violence at a rate that's higher than the US rate. 4 years ago, that wasn't true. Now we're above the national rate in gun violence. Gun violence is getting worse. Second, background checks work. 20 states have already taken action that we want Ohio to take, and that is action to close the background check loophole. And in those states, we now have a solid record that shows that various forms of gun violence are reduced in those states. So there is solid evidence to say that background checks really can make a difference. There is good, solid research reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association and in The Lancet and by Stanford that say if you're going to do one thing, pass a background check law that closes the loopholes. If you're going to start with something, and of course this is what we thought we were going to see after the Newtown shootings. The one thing that Congress tried to do is pass a background check law that would have done nothing to prevent that shooting, because that was not one of those situations where the person had the gun illegally, so to speak. But if you're going to do something, do background checks. That's why they picked that issue. And the American public, as I already said, puts background checks at the top of the list. So looking at those factors, our organization said, all right, it's background checks. And then there's one other factor, and that is that the Ohio legislature is doing nothing. We certainly have high hopes that Governor Kasich's bill, might have a chance this year because it does have some bipartisan support, but it's hard to be optimistic. They've had background check bills in front of them for years. They do nothing. But we do live in a state that has a ballot initiative process. We can go directly to the voters. So that's our strategy. We're hoping for 2019. We haven't committed yet. We've still got a lot of pieces to put in place to make it 2019, but we will do it then if we can. We would love to have your support, and I'll stop there, but you know who to talk to about
Thank you. And so let's jump to what is the Ohio legislature doing? There are several bills which Steve pointed out on the piece of paper. A lot of bills that are up right now. Rosie has the piece of paper right now. So let's talk about some of them that could potentially reduce gun violence. There are some, there's House Bill 228, Rosie. That's the Stand Your Ground bill. Can you explain what that is about and where it is right now?
I think most of us on this panel, I think all of us on this panel would agree that a Stand Your Ground bill is not a way to reduce gun violence. Stand Your Ground is a bill that shifts the burden of proof as far as somebody who feels threatened. If I have a gun and I feel threatened, do I need to retreat or can I stand my ground? One of the things you have to understand as you look at the Stand Your Ground bill is look at the trend of what has happened since 2004, when Ohio passed its first concealed carry weapons law. And on the back of this here, on the back of the paper that I have advocating for your right to be free from gun violence, I have provided a small history, a brief history of how Ohio gun laws have been liberalized so that more people can carry guns more places. Now what's currently in the legislature is to then have those people who can carry more guns more places get off the hook more easily if they make a mistake, even a fatal mistake. So a Stand Your Ground bill is if you feel threatened, then you can take your gun and shoot somebody. But the definition of what that threat is a little bit foggy. And the fact that right now the way it stands is that if you have a reason to be threatened, and truly have a reason to shoot somebody, it's basically against the law to shoot somebody. But you have something called an affirmative defense, which means that you can basically break the law if you have a good reason to break the law. And that's kind of how the law works right now. If for some reason you feel attacked and you have to shoot somebody. But the thing is that there's a centuries-old tradition. You know, if you can retreat from violence, you retreat from violence. So the stand your ground bills shift the burden of proof from somebody who feels threatened. If he discharges his weapon and someone is killed, he uses deadly force, then he goes to court, and it's up to the prosecution to say that you that you did not act in self-defense. Whereas as it stands now, the burden is on the person who does the shooting, that I have a good reason to shoot. It gets into like, okay, legalese kind of stuff, but it's a really important distinction, because what studies have shown is that that states that have had stand your ground laws seem to show pretty reliably that you basically give people a license to use deadly force and get away with it.
Where is it right now? Oh, sorry.
Where's the bill right now?
Yeah.
House Bill 228
Out of committee, I think.
has been reported out of committee.
Reported out of committee.
It's reported out of committee. It's the one that has moved the most. What we are concerned about is in the fall that we will not have a clean red flag bill. We're concerned that they may try to weaken the existing red flag bill and combine it with the stand your ground bill. So basically have a good law weakened and then combined with a bad law. And
Lauren.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Rosie. I actually want to jump in on House Bill 228 for a minute. Moms is part of Every Town for Gun Safety, and Every Town is kind of our research arm, and we do a lot of research into gun bills across the state and across the country, and give us information on how we can best argue those bills, or whether or not we're going to oppose or support. And I know House Bill 228 is one of those bills. We know that it would upend traditional self-defense law in Ohio by giving people a license to shoot and kill in public, even when there is a clear and safe alternative. We know that stand your ground disproportionately affects people of color, that when white shooters kill black victims, the resulting homicides are deemed justifiable 11 times more frequently than when the shooter is black and the victim is white. And another component of this House Bill 228 is essentially a de facto permitless carry. So that would allow people to carry guns in public and have no firearms training at all, which does not make anyone safer. We have a bunch of people who think that they're going to protect people who don't know how to use a gun. And this bill was also sponsored by Sarah LaTourette and Terry Johnson, and both of them are up for re-election this year. So keep an eye out for people that are doing things to undermine the safety of our Ohioans, and make sure to vote them out.
So Kasich does not support this bill and plans to veto it if it passes, and Republican leaders have already gone on record saying they will not support Kasich's proposed gun laws. But what do you think? It's a no-brainer. We should make ourselves safer, but then why is it that Republicans and other legislatures, say that they'll try to reverse his veto if he does veto it? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, right?
Sorry, I'm going to jump in on this one.
Did I say it wrong?
Sorry.
Just keep the mic.
I think it's the power of the voices. We've heard from legislators that when a pro-gun,
Have it closer to you.
sorry, that when a pro-gun bill is going through the State House, that they hear from your single issue callers constantly, even when that person is not a constituent, they're relentless essentially. So I think they're going to their base, they're pandering to their base, and we need to be louder and make sure they hear us. So I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I think one of the situations is that we're likely to see where they're going to combine a couple bills together. And then Casey is going to face up the question whether or not he wants to get some of the things that his bipartisan study group put together, people like Nina Turner. There's going to be a little bit more pressure. There also is going to be pressure to actually show some results because people have not, and they're not going to forget about Parkland. And so we're going to have a situation where something can happen very quickly after the election. And while we're on this subject, if you leave here today and think, well, I'm going to call my representative right now, we're quick to indicate you really don't need to do that because they're on break. And what you should do is instead, if you could meet them, and then when you call them in the fall, they're more in position to connect a face to a stand and might very well listen. And one of the other problems that we deal with and why David and we all have frustration with the Ohio House and Ohio Senate is the NRA gets involved here too. And you would think they'd work at the state level, but we've actually seen it happen. Rosie and I testified last July on Stand Your Ground, and we were somewhat stunned in this opponent testimony time where she spoke, I spoke, others spoke, I think somebody from MOM spoke, that the last person to get up and speak was an NRA representative. And then they held a vote and passed it out of committee. And it was very obvious to us all that he was there just to see who voted which way and what checks to write. And so this is very frustrating, but this is a good reason why when it comes time this fall to vote a single issue, gun violence prevention.
So let's jump to, well, David, I want to get your thoughts on this. Your organization does not support the Stand Your Ground bill, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted everyone to get it. Say it.
No brainer if I'm going to.
Okay, well, I just hear it, so I wanted for the record. But now let's move to House Bill 585. And Rosie, she's like my encyclopedia here, so I'm going to defer to her because she, when we had our conversation about this, she explained it very well. So I want you to explain House Bill 585 and all the craziness that's behind that.
Okay, thank you. House Bill 585 is actually Governor Kasich's red flag bill. There's a couple of names for this type of a bill. Red flag is one of them. Another name is gun violence restraining order. Another name, a common name, is called extreme risk protection order. What this is highlighted by the situation of the shooter at the Parkland shooting. This was a young man who was documented, a young man for whom the police had a lot of connection, a lot of contacts, knew he was a problem, knew he had a lot of guns. They did not have the legal ability to do anything about it. And you have to realize the situation we have even here in Ohio. We have so weakened our gun laws that if somebody walks down the street carrying an assault weapon openly, he has not broken the law until he takes aim at the school children in the playground. But going back to the extreme risk protection order, this is something so that if a family member or the police who've had associations with this person, if a family member or police can partition the court to say this person has guns, and with those guns is a threat to himself or to others. It allows the court to act quickly. And that means that if we have a good, strong bill with a provision in it that's called ex parte, the court can have those guns seized that day, even if that person who owns the guns is not there at the hearing. However, at the point of the seizure of the guns, a formal hearing is scheduled, and the ex parte order for seizing those guns ceases as soon as the formal hearing, the actual hearing takes place, and the judge decides whether or not that person can have his guns back, or whether or not that person is indeed a risk to themselves or others. There were, at the time of the Parkland shooting, there were about 5 states that had an extreme risk protection order. Since then, Maryland has passed one, Florida has passed one, and Governor Kasich would like to see one passed. It puts the name of the person who has a restraining order in a national crime information database, and it then makes its way into the NICS database for gun sales, and hopefully then, hopefully that if we seize if the guns are seized, he is prohibited by law from seizing buying any more guns or obtaining any more guns. But hopefully then we have also the means in place to keep him from going out and buying more guns. And many people, this has been highlighted because of the Parkland shooting, but probably where it will be most useful is in terms of suicide prevention. And
But hasn't the bill gotten watered down or?
well, what has happened is that there's 2 versions. There has always been 2 versions. One has been the Democratic version, which was first introduced into the Senate. The other was Kasich's bill, which was introduced into the House by Representative Henney. The governor doesn't introduce this. You have to have a legislature introduce the bills. The governor's bill is a good bill in another sense. It's not just a red flag bill. It takes certain federal gun laws and mirrors them at the state level. And if that were to pass, that would be an advantage, because then the Ohio police and law enforcement can make an arrest, and we can prosecute a gun crime here in Ohio, as opposed to having to wait for ATF to act and then prosecute that federal crime at the federal level. So that is part of his bill, 585. That part of that bill is not in the Democratic version, but that's a good thing. Unfortunately, the red flag part of 585, it was at the very last thing that that committee did at the end of June was to provide a substitute 585 bill, which weakened the bill by significantly in 2 ways. It changed the court. Instead of the Court of Common Pleas that would hear the protection order, it was shifted to probate court. Probate court has a lot fewer judges and does not have as much experience in criminal matters. The other thing that the bill did was to take out the ex parte, which means that in order to have an extreme risk protection order, as that bill stands now, it would take a week or 2 to get a hearing, and meanwhile that person can shoot somebody or himself. So that's a significant weakening of the bill. We need to, when we say we want an extreme risk protection order, we need to say that we want a good, strong extreme risk protection order with the ex parte included. The bill in the Senate was also a strong bill. It was stronger. The Democratic version of the bill put out by Skindell and Williams, and it is a stronger bill, but nevertheless, the governor's bill was a good bill too. So what we have to do is try to support the governor in insisting that he keep his bill strong. It's probably the most likely bill to move, and also then to insist that he not combine it with the standing ground bill.
Steve?
Yes, the substitute bill, I guess in a single word, is convoluted. It just gets more complex. And shifting things over to probate, that's not, it's going to make it more messy, more difficult to get through. And so, and of course the fear that we have is that In fact, it may get even further watered down or combined with some of our, bills on the back side. And then we have a combination bill that we're going to call a poison bill for no other term. So this is what we have to be watchful. And the thing that's a little bit concerning about this is, when will this happen? It's probably not going to happen a week or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before election. It could happen very quickly in what we call the lame duck session, which occurs basically in the month of December. And that's one good reason to sign up for alerts, because stuff like this tends to happen fairly quickly. We've seen that before.
David or Laura, would you like to add anything? So, audience question, what can citizens who are very passionate about gun control do to encourage legislatures to change the law? Anyone can take it.
I can take it, or you want it? One of the things that I think that is really important is that if you talk to your legislator here, he or she, they're probably Democratic, they're probably on board, but they can be encouraged to be watchful of this trickery that happens in the House and Senate in regards to these bills. The other thing that you can do is, if you know people in outlying counties, is to encourage them and talk with them about this issue and encourage them to get in touch with their representatives. Because those representatives tend to hear more often from the NRA members who are afraid their guns are going to get taken away. And so it's really advantageous if, for example, I get in touch with my cousin in Knox County, Ohio, and who is a teacher, and say, Judy, you need to think about this, and I know you're retired now, but you remember what it was like in Mansfield, and it's a problem there, and it's a problem in all sorts of different parts of the country, of the state. So, and really think about doing that. And August is a good month to do this, and of course think about trying to reach out and actually meet your representative and get an appointment and talk to them about this issue. That's always helpful.
Real fast, Rosie, when you say sign up for alerts, where can they sign up for alerts?
On ohioceasefire.org.
We have a flyer, sign up over there.
We have a flyer. There's a sign-up list there. You can sign up there, and then we'll basically send you an email out. We don't deluge you with emails, but we can send you an email notification when something is moving in the House and it's time for some action and time to call our representatives, because, like I said, we may not have a lot of time when the wheels start turning.
Rosie?
Without taking too much time, I want to see more people at the State House. If you're afraid of testifying, then get yourself a red shirt. I have been there testifying, and I'll tell you, I love having those red shirts there. They are a great audience. They are a great group of people. If you go down there, get a red shirt, and sit in there. Learn how to do it, and then be willing to do it yourself. Every citizen of Ohio has the right to go up in front of the committee and tell them what they think about this bill, whether they support or oppose. And if you want to know more about how to do that, again, get on our Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence website, follow the League of Women Voters, because that's who I represent when I go down there. We'll help you become a citizen testifier.
Great. What do you think is the one piece of legislation, state or federal, that would do most to prevent gun violence? I know it's a... Go for it.
I have an idea. But let me first say how much I appreciate, and everyone in Ohioans for Gun Safety appreciates the work that Rosie and Steve and Laura and their organizations are doing. I'll say it again, our organization is working on one thing, background checks, which, as I said, we agreed from the start, is the one thing. If you're going to do one thing, that's the thing to work on. But we recognize that this is a many-pronged battle. We need those people in those hearings, those legislative hearings. We need those people making phone calls to legislators about these bills that are in front of the legislature that might actually get passed. Our legislature for the last 10, well, probably back to 2004 or before, has had a great appetite for passing pro-gun bills. Consequently, we have more guns in more hands in more places on pretty much every year. The last legislature passed something called, that was nicknamed the Guns Everywhere Bill, saying you can take your concealed weapon in more and more places. There's another bill that's been haunting the legislature this year that would make it much less of an offense if you take a gun into a prohibited place. You know, it's a crazy bill. It says you can carry your concealed weapon into a bar. Well, you can already carry it into a bar. You can take it into that church that has, where, you know, you can't legally carry a gun unless they give you permission. But you could take it into a church and you would be fine unless somebody sees your concealed gun and says you have to leave. Up to that point, you haven't done anything wrong under this bill. It's another crazy bill, as crazy as Stand Your Ground is, and we need people doing that work of opposing these bills. But two answers to two questions. What's the one thing that I think we need to work on above all others? And that's background checks. And the other thing, the other question I want to answer is, well, what can we do with the legislature? Well, one of the things we can do with the legislature is go around it. Go to the voters, use the ballot initiative. Tell the legislature we will make this law because you're never going to do it, at least not as it's presently constituted.
And interesting, it happened with marijuana. It was on the ballot, or they were trying to get it on the ballot, and what happened? The Ohio legislature quickly passed it. Yes, it's not in effect. It's supposed to happen this September, but it's a law now because they didn't want the voters, I can only assume, and I'm speaking for myself, didn't want the voters to
Redistricting.
do it.
Wonderful example.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to combine two questions, but what should local governments do to overcome state laws, and how can we encourage local governments and police departments to encourage more local gun safety?
Well, there's a slight problem, and that is that we already have had things happen in the state, which I think by Ohio State Supreme Court, which prevent local governments from doing exactly that. And that's very frustrating. But this is where the judicial branch is supposed to be separate, and it doesn't seem quite like it is.
In 2006, it was called the CCW Cleanup Bill. That is when they preempted the rights of cities to have police powers that control firearms within their jurisdiction. What that has done is that it has made Ohio a quote-unquote open carry state. In the 1912 Constitution, there was a balance. It was a largely rural state. People had reasons to carry their guns openly, but they gave cities, they vested them in police powers so that they could control firearms in their parks, on their streets, what kinds of firearms, whether you register them or not. When the legislature preempted the city's gun laws and said you can't have those laws anymore, then Ohio became this, kind of evolved into the guns rights supporters say, oh, we are an open carry state. That is why during the Republican National Convention, when they had open carry protesters walking up and down the streets with their assault weapons, even the governor couldn't send them home. That's why. That law was upheld by a partisan vote by the Supreme Court, right down the lines of Republican Democrat. I think there were 2 Democrats and the rest were Republicans. I was about to say something.
While Rosie is thinking.
Yeah, but there has been in the news. Some of the cities are pushing back and trying to put additional laws. Columbus passed 4. Columbus, I think Columbus and Cincinnati both banned bump stocks because they said that they were an accessory and not a gun. House Bill 228 is pushing back again and trying to preempt cities' rights even to do a resolution. So there's a lot of push and pull in that. But basically, the biggest problem was that that our gun laws, that the municipalities had their rights preempted from having local gun ordinances.
What I would really like to see is an end to the concealed carry permit process, an end to concealed carry in our state, because it's only a matter of time before innocent kid or kids are going to get shot by some vigilante person who means well but is motivated by fear and doesn't have the training. And as our concealed carry gets more and more watered down, you don't have to have any training at all, and these people are not safe having a firearm, and emotions driving their judgment, and bad things will happen.
I'm just gonna move this a little in a different direction and put it on the people. Moms Demand Action has a program that talks about storing your guns safely. It's called our Be Smart program. It's asking about guns, not a taboo topic, just want to make it an everyday topic. And I think that we could take this program and to our police departments, to our hospitals, and get this conversation going from people, so people are also being educated on how to store their guns and protect themselves and their families.
I was going to say the same thing, Laura, and call out Moms Demand Action for that great program. I know the primary topic tonight here is laws, but there is more to this than laws. There was an earlier question about, what do we do about the person who bought their gun legally and still shoots people? Well, laws aren't going to save us from gun violence. We're trying, certainly all of us, to find ways to reduce gun violence, but there are a lot of different ways of going at this. Better mental health programs, more education about the fact that a gun in your home is more likely to be used on you and your family than on any intruder. Educating people about safe storage of their weapons. Educating people, especially parents, and I feel this as a grandparent, that we live in a world with so many guns that really it's a grandparent's responsibility to be sure that somebody's asking, is there a gun in the house? Before our kids are playing there. Because there's so many of these stories, and they're right here in Ohio, like where a kid finds a gun. We don't know how many times a kid finds a gun and shoots the gun and nobody gets hurt because Dad says, don't say anything and I'll go patch up the wall, and this is a big secret. But we do know that too many times somebody is getting hurt or killed because some gun was stored in a sloppy way. That's also a way that guns get stolen. And one of the reasons cars get broken into today, one of the reasons that some NRA members are reluctant to put a sticker now on the bumper is because people are breaking in cars to steal guns. And it's a fairly fruitful activity. So there's much more to this than laws. And there are organizations like Moms Demand Action, and God Before Guns works on this too. I wish I'd have brought a card that says, all right, be sensible. Here are some ideas about living in a world with guns.
Thank you, Steve.
I see that. Well, great. There are tips for gun owners that have nothing to do with laws. Just using your head.
So,
Can I just say
yep.
something? Okay, but on your sheet, there are 2 laws that make an adult accountable if he or she has his gun used by a minor to hurt somebody. House Bill 33 and Senate Bill 279. So the thing is that we have an opportunity to change the culture, get people to talk about safe storage, but we also need to have laws on the books so that if a child takes their uncle's gun, which is left behind the television set, and hurts somebody or kills somebody, the owner of that gun has to face the judge with the child. Otherwise, you've got an 11-year-old by himself up in front of the judge being charged with negligent homicide. So we do have the issue of laws to back up that effort to change culture.
And I just wanted to add that we hear these stories time and time again. Back in April in Streetsboro, a 13-year-old boy killed his 11-year-old brother with a stolen gun from his grandfather's house. So the story gets played out again and again. And Laura, we had a couple of questions about children that I want to get to. One was, what can a young mother with busy children do to help, and how can we talk to our children about guns?
did she say? Sorry.
I did say Laura, okay, yeah, sorry.
Well, we want to make it, Moms wants to make it easy for everyone to, again, connect with their representative. They can, Moms has a bunch of various volunteer activities to help get people who may not have a whole lot of time because they work, they're raising children. So we ask people to help us make phone calls. If all you do is follow Moms Demand Action -OH on Ohio, we put out calls to action, and you can really quick text a number to send a message to your representative about certain gun laws. You can write letters to the editor. There are many ways that activism and volunteering in this movement shows up, and it doesn't mean meeting with your representatives or devoting a whole lot of time. It can really literally be 5 minutes of your day, and it does have an impact.
Great.
And we also, to answer your other question, I don't have it with me, but we actually do have a whole sheet on discussing the issue of gun violence with your children, and if anyone's interested in that, I'll be happy to share.
Great. I wanted to go to, Steve made an interesting point about the recent Supreme Court Justice nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, and that he might reel back gun safety in a big way if he is nominated, correct? Or approved,
Yes,
right?
that is correct. And this is something that you can do tomorrow, is call up Senator Portman and tell them to both no in terms of Kavanaugh at the Supreme Court. And he might not do it, but he might follow party lines. But on the other hand, he is not the kind of candidate that we want to see in the Supreme Court, because some people feel that his perspective is even more extreme than the NRA. For example, in Washington, D.C., when I think a circuit court there green-lighted legislation to ban assault weapons, he wrote a 52-page document explaining why, and that it was just like weakening the First Amendment, and so assault weapons should be fully, legal in Washington, D.C. And meanwhile, there are folks dying there, and assault weapons, it's some of the statistics which you've heard tonight are quite true, that the vast majority of people have had enough at this point. And that's something we need to remember this fall too. But consider calling tomorrow. Consider calling up Portman. Sherrod Brown, I don't think you have to worry about him on this, but Portman, he needs to know why that Kavanaugh, he's younger, he could be in the Supreme Court for a long time, and could have a very negative impact on gun violence prevention in our country.
And another audience question, is there an effort to connect people and organizations that are working against gun violence and against gerrymandering? If all the people who are now interested in politics because of the gun issue spoke up about gerrymandering, then we could tackle larger issues and our voices would be heard more instead of falling on deaf ears of elected officials in safe districts. And anyone can respond if you want.
We have every reason to be just as proud as punch over the efforts of the League of Women Voters in the redistricting. I'm sure there are people in this room that can report back on that even better than I can. But we had a big win over the fight for redistricting of congressional districts. We fought a good fight and won a couple of years ago about redistricting the state legislature map. And so that is absolutely correct. All of those people that put these great efforts together, and the League of Women Voters did this with all volunteer workers. They did not pay petitioners, okay? They were able to get this ballot initiative on the ballot, and then, which pushed the legislature to pass something that was, I guess, decent. And so those of you that have pushed the gerrymandering and advanced the gerrymandering and helped us with gerrymandering have done a lot to help us with gun violence, because eventually we will have a better playing field in Ohio.
And I want to call out the League of Women voters, not only for their leadership on that issue, but for their many years of leadership on the gun violence prevention issue. Rosie here is a testament to the fact that the League of Women Voters has seen this as a priority item for years. And I'm proud to say that Ohioans for Gun Safety, when we created something on our website, it's called Groundbreakers. And on this, on our website, it's a list of people and a list of organizations that have said, this is a good thing. Let's do this. Let's pass background checks in Ohio. I hope you'll all get online and sign it, or let me know, and I'll help you do that by signing a card tonight. But my point is that one of the first groundbreakers on our list was the Ohio League of Women Voters, and we're very proud of that.
I'm going to try to get to a couple more of these audience questions because we're getting short on time. But another question was, we have lost local control of gun restrictions with abolition of home rule and opening Ohio to concealed carry of all 50 states by AG DeWine. Gun use is different in rural and urban areas. What can we do to get home rule back?
People stronger and mightier than me have been working on that one. The problem is that we have to undo the passage of that law. We have to give it back, which means that we have to have the votes in the legislature to undo the preemption of the city's gun laws. Cities are fighting back. They're pushing back. Columbus is in a lawsuit right now for what it passed in mid-May. We just have to keep pushing.
Talk about what they passed in mid-May, just for those who aren't familiar.
Columbus passed 4 items, and one of them was bump stocks.
Just do the ones you remember.
I'm drawing a blank. One had to do with toy guns. You could not have a gun, a toy gun that looks like a real gun with an orange tip.
That's 153.
Yeah. Anybody else help me out? I can't. I just.
Okay, well, we get the idea. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So they're pushing back with the idea that if they can try to push something that mirrors federal laws, that they can push back in this way. So just watch the lawsuit.
And why have Republicans closed ranks on protecting unregulated gun ownership? Do they get more donations from the NRA?
Yes.
And another question is, which legislatures have been most supportive? Who else has been supportive and how?
You mean my state? Different states?
Well, in Ohio, we'll go with Ohio instead of legislature.
Legislators.
Yes, legislature.
Bill Patman has been a lone ranger for years for gun violence prevention in our House. And I think it's very much to his credit that he hasn't, well, he got a little bit tired because I think he was running for mayor, but hopefully he's going to stay in the House and keep after them there because he is great and he has done great things for gun violence prevention. If he could just have a little bit of support and get them to come through and actually become law.
Is he the only guy?
Well, no, and then in the Senate, you're getting a lot of activity from Giovanni, Skindell, and Williams, Thomas. They're all pushing.
Kent Smith, Jimmy Boyd,
Nikki,
Yeah.
Antonio.
So if you look on the Senate bills,
Dan Yuko.
and something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
All of the bills from 278 on were all introduced within a few weeks' time after Parkland. We have never had so many good bills at the Ohio General Assembly. So that in itself is a push. The other thing to do is call and make sure your legislators know that you want to see these bills get a committee and ask them to push to get them into a committee. Even if we can't get the bill passed, if we can get it in committee, get a couple of hearings on it, then maybe the next time, during the next session, we can do better. We have to push.
Jump in one question. Not for our current representatives, but in this election cycle, we have had candidates from all across the state answer a questionnaire by every town, and if their current views on gun violence prevention line up, they have gotten the gun sense candidate distinction. So when you're looking at who to vote for, take that into consideration also.
And just real fast, with Parkland and the students that became grassroots and activated and went to Washington and sparked all these marches and kids walking out of class here and across the nation, do you think it's going to take them, the young, to spark the change that we need? Because like it's been going on since Columbine, and nothing has seemed to have changed or gotten better. Do you think it's the young kids that will vote the people out or make it or get in office to make this type of change?
Well, what they have done is they've made an awareness of a fact that I've known for a long time. The age group between 15 and 25 is the age group most likely for someone to die a homicide, okay? It is the kids themselves who are most vulnerable. And so in that sense, they need to fight for themselves. They've also said something, they've said the grown-ups, they said that Columbine should have been the last one, should have been the last mass shooting. The grown-ups haven't done enough to protect us. After the Parkland shooting, 200 students went down to the Ohio General Assembly, to the State House. And they had, and the speakers of the House and the Senate, they shut down the assembly for that day because they wanted to avoid the problem. Now, why didn't we have 200 parents and school teachers show up at the State House after Sandy Hook? So in a sense, I have to agree with the students. They have to do it. They're the ones that are most vulnerable. They're the ones most likely to die. Not you and me, but they are. And not just in school.
Anyone else?
We shouldn't, well, let me put it this way. I know there are now some very familiar students' faces, students from the Parkland school, the Marjorie Stoneman School, who have made national news and have traveled the country. But we are gratified to see that there are very active students in Ohio and in Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights, and anybody who went to the march, what was it called?
March
for Life. Yes, thank you. On Public Square, saw not only a huge crowd of students and adults, but some wonderful local students standing up and saying some great things. So those students are among us, and they are an inspiration, and I think they expect more from us, and they deserve more from us, and I think they're showing leadership. So it's a great development.
Go ahead.
Sorry. All I'm going to say to this, and this is on a personal level and not as moms, but I have 2 teenagers. They don't listen to the adults. So by having their peers standing up and being vocal, that to me is going to be a really effective engagement, and hopefully will translate to getting these students out to the polls.
I wouldn't be surprised to see a march or two this fall, like in October. And I would encourage each and every one of us to not only get out there ourselves, but grab a friend or two, because the more support we show for them, the more that this is recognized as a national problem, as a state problem, and a problem in our communities. And sooner or later, these legislators can't run away from it.
I would just like to mention one thing, though, about the tender age of these students. Having been involved with this gun violence prevention, many times we have people come forward who have suffered a fresh loss. And they want, some people that have to deal with the loss, they just want to be left alone in order to deal with their grief privately. Others come forward, they want to do something because their grief is driving them. But we've also found that a lot of those people, right after the tragedy, they get involved, they become active, and then suddenly they just can't anymore. There is a grieving process. And what we have to realize is that every student in that school in Parkland was a victim of gun violence. And it's hard to know how they're going to be able to process it. And some will process it better than others. But we have to realize that as adults who don't have to deal with this grief, we have a responsibility to work because we're not dealing with that fresh grief. We're not dealing with that tragedy. We're not dealing with the horror and the nightmares and the inability to study. We have, as adults, we have to do something. We can't rely on them.
So we are running out of time, but before we wrap this up, I wanted to give each panelist a chance to leave us with final thoughts. So why don't we start with Steve? If you can just give us some final thoughts on gun laws and what we should do to protect ourselves.
I'll just be very quick that to thank all of you for attending tonight and to encourage you to sustain your outrage at what we have become, this public health menace that is among us, and to stay active. You know, please choose one of our groups, get in touch. When it comes time to vote in November or before that, you know, encourage your friends to really think about this issue and vote accordingly. And in addition to that, if you get a chance to sign up, you know, for the e-blast notification or an e-notification when something is moving in the house, and you pick up that phone and call your representative, it's very important.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for being here on this important issue also, and that I'm honored to be up here among these great people and their wonderful work with their groups. And my only takeaway is going to be watch what's going on to State House. I know how, especially during lame duck, which is after the election to the end of the year. I know we're all busy with families and holidays, but this is when a lot of bills come up, some mutations in the bills. They try to get them through before the end of the year, and dangerous legislation gets through that way. So just be sure to keep an eye on that. You can get updates on our Facebook page, which again is Moms Demand Action-OH. You can also text the word join to 64488 or 64433. That'll connect you with moms. You'll get text blasts and information, and just to go out, listen to your candidates, talk to your current representatives, and make sure that, you know, they are speaking for you and they are advocating for the laws that we want to see.
Well, I want to thank you too for your interest in doing something about gun violence. I think if I had to pick two words of inspiration, those two words would be do something. And I think all of us up here today are giving you some options for how to do that. It's an honor, and I want to echo what Laura said, it's an honor to be on a panel with these three hardworking individuals and their organizations. They've been at it for years. The organization I'm representing is the newest organization in the state working on gun violence prevention. We are homegrown. We are Ohioans. We are a grassroots organization. We are working to put democracy to work through a ballot initiative. And we need your help because we have to build a campaign. We're building it from the ground up. So we need things like donations. And we need people who will say, all right, put me on your email list, which you can do tonight by filling out a card. There's also a clipboard over here and some pens. You can say, all right, I'm interested. I want to be connected to this. I want to learn about your progress. Here's a take-home card that you can take with you that identifies some ways that you can help, including things like hosting a house party, or if you are connected to an organization to which we could make a presentation. We would love to have that sort of an invitation. Ultimately, we're going to need volunteers, like the volunteers that Rosie was describing, who are out collecting signatures on petitions. We're going to need that kind of grassroots help. So if this sounds like something that you think you can get your teeth into, please see me or my colleague, Susan Reese, who's here today, also part of our leadership team, and get connected. Thanks a lot.
We all need money. Look what we're up against. I mean, we're up against an organization, the NRA, which provides millions of dollars to legislators. And we are volunteers. Volunteers, even though we're volunteers, ultimately we have to get down to a point where we have to pay a light bill, pay for our office, pay for a computer, pay for Xeroxing, pay for somebody to answer the phone. So when you think about volunteering, also think about giving us a little money. But the other thing is to keep in mind that just as we've had phrases like the war on poverty, the war on drugs, don't be lulled into thinking that this is anything but a war. This is a public health crisis. We need many soldiers. We have to fight many battles. There is no one battle that's going to win the war. It's the efforts of many soldiers, many people working on many fronts, on many different things, that's going to allow us to advance. So again, like everybody, like we've been saying, I'm honored to have been here. I thank you for being such a great audience and having such great questions. And the parting word would be, get busy. Thank you.
All right, please. I want to thank again Rosie Craig with the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, David Eggert with Ohioans for Gun Safety, Laura Lewis with Moms Demand Action, and Steve Ritchey, a board member with the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence. Thank you so much for your advice and your information this evening.